All right. So we're gonna start from the beginning with Iron John. I'll just read. Um, this series or this playlist is going to be just mostly reading. Um, we'll be reading some of the books that we've been studying and reviewing in the seminars. So I'm not sure how many books I'm going to go through or exactly which order. I just whatever I think is the most relevant to the channel. So, all right. So Iron John. So we start with the preface. We are living at an important and fruitful moment now, for it is clear to men that the images of adult manhood given by the popular culture are worn out. A man can no longer depend on them. By the time a man is 35, he knows that the images of the right man, the tough man, the true man, which he received in high school, do not work in life. Such a man is open to new visions of what a man is or could be. The hearth and fairy stories have passed as water through 50 feet of soil. Through generations of men and women, and we can trust their images more than, say, those invented by Hans Christian Andersen. The images the old stories give, stealing the key from under the mother's pillow, picking up a golden feather fallen from the burning breast of the firebird, finding the wild man under the lake water, following the tracks of one's wound through the forest, and finding that it resembles the tracks of a god. These are meant to be taken slowly into the body. They continue to unfold once taken in. It is in the old myths that we hear, for example, of Zeus energy, that positive leadership energy in men, which popular culture constantly declares does not exist. From King Arthur, we learn the value of the male mentor in the lives of young men. We hear from the Iron John story the importance of moving from the mother's realm to the father's realm. And from all initiation stories, we learn how essential it is to leave our parental expectations entirely and find a second father or second king. There is male initiation, female initiation, and human initiation. In this book, I am talking about male initiation only. I want to make it clear that this book does not seek to turn men against women, nor to return men to the domineering mode that has led to repression of women and their values for centuries. The thought in this book does not constitute a challenge to the women's movement. The two movements are related to each other, but as each moves on a separate timetable. The grief in men has been increasing steadily since the start of the Industrial Revolution, and the grief has reached a depth now that cannot be ignored. The dark side of men is clear. Their mad exploitation of earth resources, devaluation of and humiliation of women, and obsession with tribal warfare are undeniable. Genetic inheritance contributes to their obsession, but also culture and environment. We have defective mythologies that ignore masculine depth of feeling, as assign men a place in the sky instead of earth, teach obedience to the wrong powers, work to keep men boys, and entangle both men and women in systems of industrial domination that exclude both matriarchy and patriarchy. Most of the language in this book speaks to heterosexual men, but does not exclude homosexual men. It wasn't until the 18th century that people ever used the term homosexual. Before that time, gay men were understood simply as part of the large community of men. The mythology, as I see it, does not make a big distinction between homosexual and heterosexual men. I speak of the wild man in this book, and the distinction between the savage man and the wild man is crucial throughout. The savage mode does great damage to soul, earth, and humankind. We can say that though the savage man is wounded, he prefers not to examine it. The wild man who has examined his wound resembles a Zen priest, a shaman, a woodsman more than a savage. The knowledge of how to build a nest in a bare tree, how to fly to the wintering place, how to perform the mating dance. All of this information is stored in the reservoirs of the bird's instinct. Of the bird's instinctual brain. But human beings, sensing how much flexibility they might need in meeting new situations, decided to store this sort of knowledge outside the instinctual system. They stored it in stories. Stories, then fairy stories, legends, myths, hearth stories, amount to a reservoir where we keep new ways of responding that we can adopt when the conventional and current ways wear out. Some of the great students of this reservoir in recent centuries have been George Grodek, Gurdjieff, Carl Jung, Heinrich Zimmer, Joseph Campbell, and George Doomzil. My first teacher in unfolding the fairy story was Mary Louise von Franz, and I have tried to be as true to the masculine stories as she has been to the feminine in her many books. This book draws a whole community of men, many of whom worked in this field long before I entered it. First among those is Alexandra Mitscherlich, the German analyst who died in 1981, and many fine thinkers in English as well. I am indebted deeply to the men with whom I have joyfully taught during the last 8 years: Michael Mead, James Hillman, Terry Dobson, Robert Moore, and John Stokes, among many others. By the way, the professor in the School of Thought, in the seminars, is that Robert Moore. He's the professor for the Institute of Psychology in Chicago. They're the ones that I do the seminars with. We'll be reading some of his books as well throughout the playlist. Among many others, I thank Keith Thompson for his interest in the men's material. The first chapter is rewriting of his interview with me. And I thank my editor, William Patrick, for his enthusiasm and insight. I am grateful also to the many men who have trusted me enough to listen and have honoured me by telling me their own stories, or have simply sung, danced, or wept. Even though in this book I lay out an initiatory path in 8 stages, other men may see a different order of those stages, or entirely different stages. We make the path by walking. Antonio Machado said, "You, walker, there are no roads, only wind trails on the sea." Alright, chapter 1, The Pillow and the Key. I'll see if we get through. I'll see how long it takes me to get through the first chapter. I don't think I'll get through all of it though. We talk a great deal about the American man, as if there was some constant quality that remained stable over decades, or even within a single decade. The men who live today have veered far away from the Saturnian, old man-minded farmer, proud of his introversion, who arrived in New England in 1630, willing to sit through 3 services in an unheated church. In the South, an expansive, mother-bound cavalier developed, and neither of those 2 American men resembled the greedy railroad entrepreneur that later developed in the Northeast, nor the reckless I-will-do-without culture settlers of the West. Even in our own era, the agreed-on model has changed dramatically. During the 50s, for example, an American character appeared with some consistency that became a model of manhood adopted by many men. The 50s male. He got to work early, laboured responsibly, supported his wife and children, and admired discipline. Reagan is a sort of mummified version of this dogged type. This sort of man didn't see women's souls well, but he appreciated their bodies, and his view of culture and America's part in it was boyish and optimistic. Many of his qualities were strong and positive, but underneath the charm and bluff there was, and there remains, much isolation, deprivation, and passivity. Unless he has an enemy, he isn't sure that he is alive. The 50s man was supposed to like football, be aggressive, stick up for the United States, never cry, and always provide. But receptive space or intimate space was missing in this image of the man. The personality lacked some sense of flow. The psyche lacked compassion in a way that encouraged the unbalanced pursuit of the Vietnam War. Just as later, the lack of what we might call the Vietnam... Sorry, the lines are pretty close together. Sometimes I skip one. The psyche lacked compassion in a way that encouraged the unbalanced pursuit of the Vietnam War. Just as later, the lack of what we might call garden space inside Reagan's head led to his callousness and brutality toward the powerless in El Salvador, toward old people here, the unemployed, school children, and poor people in general. The 50s male had a clear vision of what a man was and what male responsibilities were, but the isolation and one-sidedness of his vision were dangerous. During the 60s, another sort of man appeared. The waste and violence of the Vietnam War made men question whether they knew what an adult male really was. If manhood meant Vietnam, did they want any part of it? Meanwhile, the feminist movement encouraged men to actually look at women, forcing them to become conscious of concerns and sufferings that the 50s male laboured to avoid. As men began to examine women's history and women's sensibility, some men began to notice what was called their feminine side and pay attention to it. This process continues to this day, and I would say that most contemporary men are involved in it in some way. There's something wonderful about this development. I mean, the practice of men welcoming their own feminine consciousness and nurturing it. This is important. And yet I have the sense that there is something wrong. The male in the past 20 years has become more thoughtful, more gentle. But by this process, he has not become more free. He's a nice boy who pleases not only his mother, but also the young woman he is living with. In the 70s, I began to see all over the country a phenomenon that we might call the soft male. Sometimes, even today, when I look out at an audience, perhaps half the young males are what I'd call soft. They're lovely, valuable people. I like them. They're not interested in harming the earth or starting wars. There's a gentle attitude toward life in their whole being and style of living. But many of these men are not happy. You quickly notice the lack of energy in them. They are life-preserving, but not exactly life-giving. Ironically, you often see these men with strong women who positively radiate energy. Here we have a finely tuned young man, ecologically superior to his father, sympathetic to the whole harmony of the universe. Yet he himself has little vitality to offer. Here we have the strong or life-given women who graduated from the 60s, so to speak, or who have inherited an older spirit, played an important part in producing this life-preserving but not life-giving man. I remember a bumper sticker during the 60s that read, "Women say yes to men who say no." We recognize that it took a lot of courage to resist the draft, go to jail, or move to Canada, just as it took courage to accept the draft and go to Vietnam. But the women of 20 years ago were definitely saying that they preferred the softer, receptive male. So the development of men was affected a little in this preference. Non-receptive maleness was equated with violence, and receptive maleness was rewarded. Some energetic women at that time, now in the 90s, chose and still choose soft men to be their lovers and, in a way, perhaps, to be their sons. The new distribution of yang energy among couples didn't happen by accident. Young men, for various reasons, wanted their harder women, and women began to desire softer men. It seemed like a nice arrangement for a while, but we've lived with it long enough now to see that it isn't working out. I first learned about the anguish of soft men when they told their stories in early men's gatherings. In 1980, the Lama community in New Mexico asked me to teach a conference for men only, their first in which about 40 men participated. Each day, we concentrated on one Greek god and one old story. And then late in the afternoons, we gathered to talk. When the younger men spoke, it was not uncommon for them to be weeping within 5 minutes. The amount of grief and anguish in these younger men was astounding to me. Part of their grief rose out of remoteness from their fathers, which they felt keenly, but partly too, grief flowed from the trouble in their marriages or relationships. They had learned to be receptive, but receptivity wasn't enough to carry their marriages. through troubled times. In every relationship, something fierce is needed once in a while. Both the man and the woman need to have it. But at the point when it was needed, often, the young man came up short. He was nurturing, but something else was required for his relationship and for his life. The soft male was able to say, I can feel your pain and I consider your life as important as mine, and I will take care of you and comfort you. But he could not say what he wanted and stick by it. Resolve of that kind was a different matter. In the Odyssey of Hermes, in the Odyssey, Hermes instructs Odysseus that when he approaches Circe, can't say the name, who stands for a certain kind of matriarchal energy, he is to lift or show his sword. In these early sessions, it was difficult for many of the younger men to distinguish between showing the sword and hurting someone. One man, a kind of incarnation of certain spiritual attitudes of the 60s, a man who had actually lived in a tree for a year outside Santa Cruz, found himself unable to extend his arm when it held a sword. He had learned so well not to hurt anyone that he couldn't lift the steel, even to catch the light of the sun on it. But showing a sword doesn't necessarily mean fighting. It can also suggest a joyful decisiveness. The journey many American men have taken into softness or receptivity or development of the feminine side has been an immensely valuable journey, but more travel lies ahead. No stage is the final stop. I think we'll stop there. It's a good introduction to the book. It's crazy. I think I should have checked when the book was written. I think it was in the 80s. You can see how relevant. It's like the receptivity wasn't enough to carry their marriages through troubled times. In every relationship, something fierce is needed once in a while, you know? I mean, it's still relevant, like, in the relationships now, you know? But the story gets much, much, much deeper, and the psychological, revelation gets pretty deep. So yeah, I'm keen to get through it all on the playlist. So good luck. Good luck, dudes. See you next one.